The report of N.S. Khrushchev at the 20th Congress begins with the preamble. Comrades, in the Party Central Committee's report at the 20th Congress and in a number of speeches by delegates to the Congress, as also formally during plenary CC/CPSU sessions, quite a lot has been said about the cult of the individual and about its harmful consequences. After Stalin's death, the Central Committee began to implement a policy of explaining concisely and consistently that it is impermissible and foreign to the spirit of Marxism-Leninism to elevate one person, to transform him into a superman possessing supernatural characteristics akin to those of a god. Such a man supposedly knows everything, sees everything, thinks for everyone, can do anything, is infallible in his behavior. Such a belief about a man, and specifically about Stalin, was cultivated among us for many years. The objective of the present report is not a thorough evaluation of Stalin's life and activity. Concerning Stalin's merits, an entirely sufficient number of books, pamphlets, and studies had already been written in his lifetime. The role of Stalin in the preparation and execution of the socialist revolution, in the Civil War, and in the fight for the construction of socialism in our country is universally known. Everyone knows it well. At present, we are concerned with a question which has immense importance for the party now and for the future, with how the cult of the person of Stalin has been gradually growing. The cult, which became at a certain specific stage the source of a whole series of exceedingly serious and grave perversions of party principles, of party democracy, of revolutionary legality. Because not all as yet realize fully the practical consequences resulting from the cult of the individual, or the great harm caused by violation of the principle of collective party direction and by the accumulation of immense and limitless power in the hands of one person, the Central Committee considers it absolutely necessary to make material pertaining to this matter available to the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. It would seem that everything is correct, quite well-meaning, and relevant, at least at the time of the 20th Congress of the CPSU. There is only one question. What if J.V. Stalin was really one of the few governors in the USSR who thought for each and everyone? When most of the other governors either did not know how to think and did not want to, like the majority of the delegates to the 20th Congress, or they thought individually and mafia corporatively, for the most part, about their own self-interest, like the participants in the Central Committee Presidium meeting on February 1st, 1956, and many other party, state, and economic officials. And each of them thought for each and everyone only within the boundaries of their official duties and only under the pressure of the insistence on high standards by J.V. Stalin towards subordinates. Ordinary people who were engaged in labor which was not of a statewide governorial or local governorial character, simply did not have the free time and energy to think about each and everyone, and, moreover, they were not informed sufficiently broadly and deeply, primarily on questions of history, sociology, economics, psychology. If this is so, and it really was so during the time of J.V. Stalin, and continues to be so after his death to the present day, then this created the objective basis in society for ordinary people to respect J.V. Stalin, first of all, as a governor who successfully solves tasks and problems of social as a whole significance, and the governing bureaucratic mafia, depicting its respect for J.V. Stalin, created the personality cult of Stalin and basked in the aura of this cult. Without the respect of many ordinary people for J.V. Stalin, the cult of his personality would have been impossible, as later the creation of the personality cults of N.S. Khrushchev, L.I. Brezhnev, M.S. Gorbachev, which was attempted by the governing bureaucracy and other sycophants, just as was done in the Stalinist era, turned out to be impossible. Nonetheless, N.S. Khrushchev, in his report, passed over in silence the objective social prerequisites for the emergence of the cult of personality of the head of the party and state in the USSR, and immediately set about explaining the subjective attitude towards the cult of personality of the founders of Marxism, K. Marx and F. Engels, citing the relevant quotes from their works which he hardly knew where to find, but the reference and puppeteers pulled the strings, and the quotes formed the subject. In a letter to the German political worker Wilhelm Blass, Karl Marx stated, "From my antipathy to any cult of the individual, I never made public during the existence of the First International the numerous addresses from various countries which recognized my merits and which annoyed me. I did not even reply to them, except sometimes to rebuke their authors. Friedrich Engels and I first joined the secret society of communists on the condition that everything making for superstitious worship of authority would be deleted from its statute. Ferdinand Lassalle subsequently did quite the opposite." Sometime later, Engels wrote, "Both Marx and I have always been against any public manifestation with regard to individuals, with the exception of cases when it had an important purpose. We most strongly opposed such manifestations which during our lifetime concerned us personally." The great modesty of the genius of the revolution, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, is known. Lenin always stressed the role of the people as the creator of history, the directing and organizational roles of the party as a living and creative organism, and also the role of the Central Committee. Marxism does not negate the role of the leaders of the working class in directing the revolutionary liberation movement. While ascribing great importance to the role of the leaders and organizers of the masses, Lenin, at the same time, mercilessly stigmatized every manifestation of the cult of the individual, inexorably combated any foreign to Marxism views about a hero and a crowd, and countered all efforts to oppose a hero to the masses and to the people. Having read this, one might think that J.V. Stalin did not have a definite opinion on the question of the cult of personality, or that he adhered to some other views, and on their basis deliberately implanted the cult of his own personality. In actual fact, J.V. Stalin directly and repeatedly condemned the attempts of many officials and others to isolate themselves as a new social elite, and did not want, either explicitly or secretly, in the depths of his soul, to be the leader and personification of this elite. In my life, I twice called Stalin a genius. Once in some greeting that I did not write, there was a group signature. Stalin got angry and ordered that it be crossed out. "How did you end up on here?" "I ended up on here as is right and proper." "Really? You too are trailing after everyone?" This from the story of V.M. Molotov, F.I. Chuyev, Molotov, a semi-powerful ruler. And if one is familiar with the texts of the published works of J.V. Stalin himself, then the last paragraph we quoted from the report of N.S. Khrushchev downright cries out that it should be continued by the text of J.V. Stalin himself. Here is a letter from J.V. Stalin, Publications for Children, directed to the Central Committee of the All-Union Communist Youth, February the 16th, 1938. I am absolutely against the publication of stories of the childhood of Stalin. The book abounds with a mass of inexactitudes of fact, of alterations, of exaggerations, and of unmerited praise. Some amateur writers, scribblers, perhaps honest scribblers, and some adulators have led the author astray. It is a shame for the author, but a fact remains a fact. But this is not the important thing. The important thing resides in the fact that the book has a tendency to engrave on the minds of Soviet children, and people in general, the personality cult of leaders, of infallible heroes. This is dangerous and detrimental. The theory of heroes and the crowd is not a Bolshevik, but a social revolutionary theory. The heroes make the people, transform them from a crowd into people. Thus, say the social revolutionaries, the people make the heroes. Thus reply the Bolsheviks to the social revolutionaries. The book carries water to the windmill of the social revolutionaries. No matter which book it is that brings the water to the windmill of the social revolutionaries, this book is going to drown in our common Bolshevik cause. I suggest we burn this book. To a normal person, it should be univocally clear from this letter of J.V. Stalin that the cult of personality is not created by the idols of the cult. but by sycophants who choose idols for themselves, or who, by force of some of their subjective characteristics, are hypocrites in front of their superiors. And the statement is not a scientific discovery made by J.V. Stalin in the field of psychology and sociology. This has been known since ancient times, if not in all, then in the vast majority of cultures. However, this was not clear to the delegates of the 20th Congress in 1956. This did not become clear to the entire anti-Stalinist society in subsequent years. This is idiocy of the highest standard and an almost complete decay of nraviousness. And if N.S. Khrushchev had not been a scoundrel, he would also have included in the text of the report this opinion of J.V. Stalin on the harmfulness of the cult of personalities of leaders for the mission of building socialism and communism. However, in this case, N.S. Khrushchev would have had to have touched upon a different problematics in his report. How could the cult of personality arise and be maintained, contrary to the clearly expressed desire of the personality itself? But it is precisely this topic that the scoundrels, having released N.S. Khrushchev with a report to the Congress, wanted to pass over in silence. There may be objections on the theme that the quoted letter of J.V. Stalin to the Central Committee of the All-Union Communist Youth was belated, since it appeared when the cult had already taken shape, that it was unknown to N.S. Khrushchev, that the mention of the socialist revolutionary theory of the hero and the crowd in the report of N.S. Khrushchev and in the letter of J.V. Stalin is an accidental coincidence, and not evidence of the fact that the author of the report knew about Stalin's letter and used it in preparation of the report. Indeed, during the life of J.V. Stalin, 13 volumes of his collected works were published, which contain his works from up to and including January 1934, and therefore the letter to the Central Committee of the All-Union Communist Youth was not known to the public. The last volume of the collected works of J.V. Stalin was published in 1951, after which the publication of the remainder of the volumes was terminated. And there are no indications and evidence that this was done at the behest of J.V. Stalin, since for him the publication of his collected works was almost the only way to convey to the people directly and capture in history his understanding of the past era and the prospects, and Stalin knew that he did not have long to live. Therefore, the termination during his lifetime of the publication of collected works of J.V. Stalin is another argument against the consistency of the Khrushchev version that J.V. Stalin was a narcissistic sovereign dictator who purpose-orientedly instilled the cult of his personality. The publication of the collected works of J.V. Stalin was terminated during his lifetime through sabotage by inner-party anti-Stalinist and, in its essence, anti-Bolshevik mafia during the preparation of the volumes following the 13th. Another testimony of F.I. Chuyev. They started talking about Trotsky, about the assessment of his activities in Stalin's article The October Revolution. An entire paragraph, it turns out, was not included in Stalin's works. Molotov brought his volume, where in the margin by hand was written what Stalin had in the original version, about how Trotsky managed to win the Petrograd garrison over to the side of the revolution. It turns out that Stalin was also edited, sometimes. And it is unlikely that this withdrawal was committed by J.V. Stalin, since in a footnote on the same page, one more piece of evidence is given. In 1939, Stalin, looking over the second volume of the History of the Civil War, asked, "And where is the portrait of Trotsky?" "But he is an enemy of the people. He was the People's Commissar for Military Affairs," said Stalin. And after the murder of J.V. Stalin by his associates, the publication of his collected works was not resumed, despite the corresponding decision of the Central Committee of the CPSU, adopted in March 1953, to perpetuate the memory of J.V. Stalin. Moreover, after the 20th Congress, the study of the works of J.V. Stalin was withdrawn from the system of historical sociological education and party studies, and the works themselves were withdrawn from the general access of libraries, moved to special depositories, and were not republished in the USSR. However, Since the order to citizens to hand over the works of the tyrant, available in home libraries, was not followed, some families retained unfinished collections of works by J.B. Stalin, as well as individual editions of his works and their publications in newspapers. Thanks to this, we now have the opportunity to analyze the essence of the 20th Congress. In contrast to the position of the legacy of J.B. Stalin in the USSR is the fact that in the mid-1960s, the Hoover Institution on War, Revolution and Peace, USA, Stanford, California, published volumes 14, 15, 16 of the collected works of J.B. Stalin in Russian. This means that there was an extensive leak of materials from the Institute of Marxism-Leninism under the Central Committee of the CPSU, which in Soviet times was in charge of publishing and republishing the works of the leaders of the world communist movement. The leak could have been authorized. The publication of J.B. Stalin's works in Russian by the Hoover Institution means that the higher-ups of the United States recognized in J.B. Stalin a real, outstanding communist politician, and they needed his writings in order to reasonably build their global anti-communist policy. They needed them in Russian and not in translation into English, because in translation the translator unwittingly cuts the meaning that surpasses his own understanding and does not fit into it. And accordingly, in order to simplify the implementation of the global anti-communist policy, it was necessary that in the USSR the Stalinist ideological heritage was not available to anyone, except for those who were entrusted by the higher-ups of politics with access to the special depositories of libraries and archives. This again is about the fact that to speak about the 20th Congress and its impact on the quality of the future of all mankind, outside the context of global politics, is intellectual underdevelopment or idiocy, or deliberate villainy. Having made this excursion into the history of domestic and foreign book printing, let us return to the report of N.S. Khrushchev to the 20th Congress. If we relate to chronology, then the report of N.S. Khrushchev at the 20th Congress pays more attention to the events that had taken place precisely from the end of 1934, the murder of S.M. Kirov, mass repressions of the period of the Yezhov terror, political processes of 1937-1938, when N.I. Yezhov, as the People's Commissar of Internal Affairs, was replaced by L.P. Beria, the Great Patriotic War, the Leningrad Affair, Voznesensky, Kuznetsov, Radionov, Popkov, and others received what they deserved, the doctor's plot, and is almost completely silent about what happened in the country before 1934, what G.G. Yagoda, as People's Commissar of Internal Affairs, did, what L.D. Trotsky, N.I. Bukharin, L.B. Kamenev, G.E. Zinoviev, and some other activists of the revolution who perished after 1934 did. He is also silent about the struggle against cosmopolitanism in the late 1940s. That is, the report of Khrushchev is structured so as not to enter into polemics with Stalin, whose opinion on certain questions was expressed in an incomplete collection of his works. Therefore, let us turn to the times when there was not yet any cult of personality of J.B. Stalin. It is June the 8th, 1926. J.B. Stalin has only served 3 years as General Secretary of the Central Committee of the CPSU-B. Not even 2.5 years have passed since the time of the death of V.I. Lenin. There is still a new economic policy in the country. The development of the first 5-year plan has not even begun, neither has industrialization or collectivization. General illiteracy is in the process of being overcome. In fact, the USSR as a state superconcern, does not yet exist, but the cult already exists. The cult is already there. However, in those years there was not one cult of one particular personality, but a multitude of cults of many personalities, leaders of the revolution and heroes of the Civil War, Lenin, Krupskaya, Trotsky, Budyeni, Voroshilov, Frunze, Tukhachevsky, union-wide. Zinoviev was on the local scale of Leningrad, with claims to all union, and besides the mentioned ones there are many other cults of leaders and heroes on a smaller scale. Some cults have passed their apogee and rolled towards decline. Trotsky, Zinoviev. Others outlived their idols, Lenin, Frunze, and others still have simply taken place. Budyonny, Voroshilov, Tukhachevsky. However, cults of personality did not appear in great numbers in 1926. They began to emerge during the success of the revolutions of 1905, 1907, and 1917, and the Civil War. The idols themselves treated the cults of their personalities in different ways. V.I. Lenin and F.E. Dzerzhinsky, according to the testimonies of their contemporaries, were against the cult of their personalities and devoted themselves entirely to the cause in which they saw the meaning of their lives. Trotsky, Zinoviev, although they did something and sometimes quite a lot, the question what did they do is a special question. Nonetheless, therewith, as contemporaries testify, they loved to show off. The cult of their personalities was pleasant to their complacency. Here there is one more circumstance that should be noted. There are two types of atheism. Idealistic atheism directly declares, God exists, He is the Creator and Almighty, and further develops and imposes on people such a belief that the more faithful a person is to this belief, the further he is from the stream of God's providence, and the more problems he has in interrelationships with life and God. Materialistic atheism is more honest. It directly declares, there is no God, all creeds are the fictions of the cult rulers, and therefore it hinders people less from living according to Sovest than idealistic atheism does. Of course, under the condition that the Sovest in a person is not suppressed. As a result of the victory of the revolution in 1917, the dominance of the ideology of idealistic atheism in Russia ended, and the imposition of the dominance of the ideology of Marxism, materialistic atheism, began. However, at the same time, people for the most part remained the same. Their psychic background, that which is deeper in the psyche than lexically expressed ideologies, remained the same. Therefore, all those hopes that were previously pinned on God, as a result of the transition from idealistic atheism to materialistic atheism, became wanderers. This created automatically realizable preconditions for the elevation of the head of state to the rank of a superman, possessing supernatural characteristics akin to those of a god. Words from the report of N. Khrushchev. If the aspirations of sufficiently wide social strata are embodied in his politics. In the politics pursued under the leadership of J.V. Stalin, the aspirations of sufficiently wide strata of society, much wider than the eternally dissatisfied groups of the intelligentsia, were stably being realized, although there were mistakes and abuse of power by many party, state, and economic officials. The cult of personality of the party leader under such conditions would have been impossible only in one of two cases: if society had been obviously psychically different, or if politics had deceived the most significant hopes and aspirations of a sufficiently wide circle of people, which took place later, during the times of Khrushchev himself, Brezhnev, Gorbachev, Yeltsin, as a result of which they would accuse the leaders of deceiving their hopes. For the sake of realizing what is most significant to them, people are able to endure and forgive much without reproach, and if what is most significant is absent, then they will not forgive even the smallest things. So, having become de jure the first person of the party after the death of V.I. Lenin, J.V. Stalin fell into the process of cult creation after a great delay, about 5 to 7 years. But he fell into it after all, thanks to the success of the politics pursued under his leadership and personified by him in the conditions of mass cult creation that began during the years of the Revolution and the Civil War. The cult of his personality eclipsed all other cults of personalities. How J.V. Stalin reacted to the first attempts at cult creation in relation to him is made clear in his speech. Reply to the greetings of the workers of the chief railway workshops in Tiflis on June 8, 1926. Comrades, permit me, first of all, to tender my comradely thanks for the greetings conveyed to me here by the representatives of the workers. I must say in all conscience, comrades, that I do not deserve a good half of the flattering things that have been said here about me. I am, it appears, a hero of the October Revolution, the leader of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the leader of the Communist International, a legendary warrior knight, and all the rest of it. That is absurd, comrades, and quite unnecessary exaggeration. It is the sort of thing that is usually said at the graveside of a departed revolutionary, but I have no intention of dying yet. It is clearly said. That is absurd, comrades, and quite unnecessary exaggeration. Why did they not follow the clearly expressed opinion of the leader? Due to the fact that social psychology was such that whether J.V. Stalin wanted it or not, society, millions of people, created the cult of his personality themselves, and few people could resist and not become drawn into this collective madness. Moreover, to create a cult of personality of certain positions is a systemic principle of building power, which for centuries has been followed by many behind-the-scenes political forces, in particular Freemasonry. However, in line with the Khrushchev myth, this fragment of the reply to the greetings of the workers in itself can be assessed as ordinary ritual etiquette speeches, the purpose of which is to hide irrepressible pride, conceit, and complacency behind the words of modesty. In reality, however, J.V. Stalin was not what the report of N.S. Khrushchev and all the subsequent literature that follows from this report present him as. He perceived his contemporaries as they were. With that, he respected some, but not others. With those whom he respected, he attempted to build ordinary human relationships, took care of them in a comradely manner. With those whom he did not respect, he was formally polite. In relation to those who were able to evoke from him not just lack of respect, but contempt, he did not always keep within the boundaries of formal politeness, and put them in their place, in public, and sometimes repeatedly, which offended their pride. Stalin did not always find it useful, however, to remove such people from the apparatus. A shortage of socially responsible governorial cadres and high professional non-governors, combined with an overabundance of ambitious fools striving for self-affirmation through suppression of others, is a chronic disease of Russian society. Moreover, J.V. Stalin did not strive to destroy those with whom he did not have a personal relationship. Among those who could arouse the contempt of J.V. Stalin, to all appearances, was N.S. Khrushchev. And, as it is already clear from the analysis of the report he read at the 20th Congress, N.S. Khrushchev carried a certain inveracity and low cunning, which aroused disgust among many people who were forced to communicate with him. Therefore, in this case, it is not necessary to blame J.V. Stalin for the fact that he did not respect N.S. Khrushchev and many others similar to him. However, in 1956, what J.V. Stalin was like in life, the majority of people in the USSR did not know. Only employees of the highest levels of the party and state apparatus, as well as leading professionals in various fields of activity, were in systematic personal communication with him in activity. The memoirs of those who, at work, were in systematic communication with J.V. Stalin at different periods of his life had not yet been written and published. It was in the conditions of incessant cult creation by the majority of the population, who knew the cult of personality only according to newspapers, newsreels, and, indirectly, through the improvement of the quality of their lives from 5-year plan to 5-year plan, that the party and state officials of the level of N.S. Khrushchev, who were in systematic communication with J.V. Stalin for many years, or even decades, were perceived as the closest associates of J.V. Stalin and his students, enjoying his full confidence. Therefore, when N.S. Khrushchev cited examples of the abuse of power that took place in the Stalin era, many believed him due to the lack of their own experience of communication with J.V. Stalin, and the perception of the members of the Central Committee and the Presidium of the Central Committee as real communists who had established themselves in such equality in their activity during the Stalinist era. Nowadays, if one conducts a thematic search Within the texts of the published memoirs of the participants in these events who communicated with J.B. Stalin systematically over the years, and who did not arouse contempt in J.B. Stalin, then there appears a different picture that refutes Khrushchev's version on the origin of the cult of personality of J.B. Stalin, and refutes the Nravi's psychological portrait of a monster that has taken shape in the minds of many of our contemporaries under the influence of the subcultural tradition of the liberal intelligentsia and other lumpen, dating back to the report of N.S. Khrushchev at the 20th Congress. In particular, aircraft designer A.S. Yakovlev, in his memoirs The Aim of a Lifetime, writes the following. In everyday work, it often happened that a person, having received a new appointment, being faced with difficulties, complained about the lack of cadres. There is no one to work with, there is no one to rely on, and in order to have someone to rely on, he dragged along the so-called tail, that is, employees from the previous job. I have heard from Stalin resolute objections to this dragging along of people. People are generally the same everywhere, he said. Of course, it would be good to provide everyone with good people, but there are few good people. You can't make everyone good. There are average workers. There are many of them, more than good ones. And there are bad ones. Bad ones also exist. We must work with those that there are. I also paid attention to the following remark. Everyone has shortcomings and mistakes in their work. There are no holy people. Therefore, small flaws in everyone's work must be put up with. It is important that the balance is positive. Do you think you have no flaws? He touched his hand to my shoulder. You do, and I also have faults. Although I am a great leader and teacher. I know this from the newspapers, joked Stalin. From this we can understand that J.V. Stalin really perceived people as they are, and he perceived the cult of his personality as an objective reality of the era in which he happened to live. However, if someone had gained his respect, then he didn't miss the opportunity to emphasize his ironic attitude towards the cult of his personality, letting them know that cults of personality are inappropriate in a society of normal people. He supported and encouraged the manifestation of initiative and responsibility on the part of people sought to have a friendly relationship with them. Usually, the one who visited Stalin at first did not dare to answer a posed question for a long time, tried to think it over carefully so as not to get into a pickle. So, at first, before answering, I hesitated, looked out the window, at the ceiling, and Stalin, laughing, said, "You look at the ceiling in vain. Nothing is written there. You do better to look straight and say what you think. This is the only thing that is required of you." Somehow I found it difficult to answer the posed question. I did not know how my answer would be perceived, whether what I said would be liked. Stalin frowned. "Only please, answer as you think. Don't pander. This is not necessary in conversations with me. There will be little benefit from our conversation if you try to guess my desires. Don't think that if you say something out of place with my opinion it will be bad. You're a specialist. We speak together in order that I learn something from you, and not just that I instruct you." And he immediately told about a certain governorial employee who was at one time relieved of his post. What was it that was bad about him? Before answering any question, he tried to guess by the eyes how to speak, in order that his words would not turn out to be inappropriate, that they would be liked, that they would please. So he would watch one's mouth in order to repeat some stupidity after the authorities. Such a person unwittingly can do great harm to the mission. A dangerous person. And he continued, "If you are firmly convinced that you are right and will be able to prove your rightness, never reckon with someone's opinions, but act as your mind and Soviets dictate." Sometimes Stalin received official papers, the authors of which considered it not only appropriate, but also permissible, to add to the end of the letters all kinds of outpourings of feelings and assurances of their loyalty. On reading such a letter aloud, reaching the end, Stalin would either skip it, or he would say, "Well, here it is, as expected. Hooray, hurrah, long live the CPSUB and its leader, the great Stalin," And, squinting roguishly, he added, "He thinks to bribe me with this, to enlist support." And Stalin factually followed these principles in life. In communication with him, in work and activity, some professionals sometimes went to the point of swearing and aroused his anger towards themselves. One can learn about this from their memoirs. They did not fall victim to repression. As an example, refer to the recollections of the artillery designer V.G. Grabin, Weapon of Victory. Grabin reports on the discussion at a meeting of the State Defense Committee on the possibilities of increasing the production of artillery guns. In December 1941, Voroshilov came to the plant. All day we went from workshop to workshop together and did not even have time to dine. Kliment Yefremovich really liked everything he saw. "You have done amazingly, fellows," he praised. On January the 4th, I was summoned to a USSR State Defense Committee meeting. So, the long-awaited case had presented itself, where it would be possible to report to J.V. Stalin about the ZIS-3 gun, and possibly to show it, I thought. Permission from the People's Commissar, D.F. Ustinov, was needed. Dmitry Fyodorovich had visited the plant shortly before and become acquainted with the state of production. He had seen that the plant would not only fulfill the five-fold increase in the production of guns promised for December, but also exceed it. In addition, in the assembly workshop, he observed the assembly of the ZIS-3. The plant asked the People's Commissar for permission to deliver the guns to Moscow, and he immediately gave permission. Voroshilov was not present at the meeting. The meeting of the State Defense Committee immediately turned into a sharp dialogue between Stalin and me. All our work was subjected to very severe and unjust criticism, and Stalin accused me of leaving the country without guns. At this point, in the quote of Grabin's book, there arises a special question. Who falsely illuminated the state of affairs for J.V. Stalin? Further continues the quote. I defended the position of our collective to the last. The atmosphere of this meeting may well be characterized by only one episode. When I tried yet again to object to Stalin and defend the correctness of our chosen position, the usual restraint and composure betrayed him. He grabbed a chair by the back and slammed its legs on the floor. There was irritation and anger in his voice. You have a designer's itch. You want to constantly change everything, he snapped at me sharply. Work as you did before. I had never seen Stalin like this, neither before nor since. The State Defense Committee decided our plant should make guns in the old way. In a heavy and completely hopeless mood, I left the Kremlin. I was not afraid for my own fate, which could turn out tragically. A return to the old drawings and to old technology inevitably threatened not only a sharp decrease in the production of guns, but also a temporary cessation of their production in general. Now the country would really be left without guns. I spent the night awake in the bomb shelter of the People's Commissariat of Arms. To carry out Stalin's order would mean disaster, but how not to fulfill the order of Stalin himself? There was no escape. Early in the morning of January the 5th, it was still quite dark. An officer comes up to me and proposes that I go upstairs to the telephone. I don't go. If they want to arrest me, let them arrest me here. A heavy apathy had gripped me. I already didn't care. And I had almost no doubt about what awaited me. My dispute with Stalin carried, if not to delve into its essence, the character of a challenge, and to qualify this as sabotage or subversion, this would be child's play. After a while the officer appeared again. You are asked to the telephone, he repeated, and added, Comrade Stalin will talk to you. Indeed, Stalin had called. He said, You're right. I felt struck by heat. What you have done cannot be immediately understood and appreciated. Moreover, will they understand you in the near future? After all, what you have done is a revolution in technology. The Central Committee, the State Defense Committee, and I highly appreciate your achievements. Stalin continued, Calmly finish the job you have begun. Our comment, if this is not precisely a manifestation of comradely concern for Grabin, since Stalin understood in what state he had left the meeting, then what is it? Further continues the quote. What had happened? In the night, After the thunderous meeting of the State Defense Committee, Stalin, by all appearances, had phoned or met with Voroshilov, who then told him about our affairs, about everything that he had seen with his own eyes. But I came to this idea only later, cross-referencing the events. And V.G. Graben is not the only one who quotes such facts where, on discussion of matters, people reached an extreme degree in the expression of their differences of opinion with J.V. Stalin. It also happened that in the heat of discussion of an affair, expressing their disagreement, they themselves broke down and started yelling at Stalin, almost coming to the point of swearing. And then he calmed them down and admitted their correctness in their opinions on certain issues specifically. Verbosity not related to specific problems and deeds, J.V. Stalin did not tolerate. And pay special attention to the fact that Stalin apologized to Graben not in passing during the next discussion of artillery issues in the Kremlin after some time had passed. J.V. Stalin, realizing that he was wrong and had shown lack of restraint in relation to Graben, himself sought the latter out in order to apologize and reassure him, having seen in what state he left the Kremlin and how many sycophantic, envious, and over-vigilant people, obsequious in front of superiors, were around him. A direct evaluation of J.V. Stalin by V.G. Graben is given in the book of F.I. Chuyev, Molotov, a semi-sovereign ruler. I asked him, in your opinion, was Stalin an intelligent man? Intelligent is not the right word. There are many intelligent people. He was a heartful man. He cared about people, did Stalin. Khrushchev said that we were not preparing for war, and I made all my guns before the war. But if they had listened to Tukhachevsky, they would not have been made. And this is what Khrushchev states in his report to the 20th Congress. On the occasion after the war, during a meeting between Stalin and the members of the Politburo, Anastas Ivanovich Mikoyan mentioned that Khrushchev must have been right when he telephoned concerning the Kharkov operation, and that it was unfortunate that his suggestion had not been accepted. You should have seen Stalin's fury. How could it be admitted that he, Stalin, had not been right? He is after all a genius, and a genius cannot help but be right. Everyone can err, but Stalin considered that he never erred, that he was always right. He never acknowledged to anyone that he made any mistake, large or small, despite the fact that he made more than a few in matters of theory and in his practical activity. After the Party Congress, we shall probably have to re-evaluate many of our wartime military operations and present them in their true light. With Stalin, it was possible to discuss the topic of repressions and their groundlessness, not in general from the standpoint of abstract humanism, but concretely and in essence. A.S. Yakovlev quotes his conversation with J.V. Stalin in July 1941. Comrade Stalin, it has been more than a month since our Deputy Commissar for Engines, Balandin, was arrested. We don't know why he was imprisoned, but we can't imagine him to be an enemy. He is needed in the People's Commissariat. The leadership of engine building is very weakened. We ask you to consider his case. Yes, he has been sitting for 40 days, but does not give any evidence. Maybe there is nothing behind him. It is very possible. And this happens, Stalin answered. The next day, Vasily Petrovich Balandin, haggard and shaved bald, had already occupied his office in the People's Commissariat and continued to work, as if nothing had happened to him. A few days later, Stalin asked, "Well, how is Balandin?" "He works, Comrade Stalin, as if nothing had happened." "Yes, they imprisoned him in vain." Apparently Stalin read the bewilderment in my eyes. How could one imprison innocent people? And without any questions from my side, he said, "Yes, it can happen this way. An intelligent person. He works well. They envy him. They undermine him. And if in addition he is a brave person, says what he thinks, he causes discontent and attracts the attention of suspicious KGB officers who themselves do not know the case, but willingly use all sorts of rumors and gossip. Yezhov is a scoundrel, a degraded person. You call him at the People's Commissariat, they say, he left for the Central Committee. You call the Central Committee, they say he left for work. You send for him at his house, it turns out that he is lying dead drunk on the bed. He killed many innocent people. For this we shot him. After such words, the impression was created that lawlessness was happening behind Stalin's back. But at the same time, other facts aroused opposing thoughts. Could, for example, Stalin not know what Beria was up to? However, having expressed this assertion, A.S. Yakovlev did not cite a single fact in support of these words. In general, over the past 5 decades of struggle against Stalinism, no one and nowhere has cited a single proven fact of falsification of criminal cases in the direction of J.V. Stalin. All such statements are encouraged to be taken on faith. N.S. Khrushchev did not quote a single fact similar to those reported by V.G. Grabin and A.S. Yakovlev in his report, although he could not have but known that such facts had taken place and that they were not isolated. However, they did not delve into the official scheme of the truthful understanding of the era announced through him. Stalin is a maniac power lover, and we, all the others, are innocent victims of his manic suspicion, distrust in people, and professional incompetence. In the above fragment of V.G. Grabin's memoirs, there is a phrase in which an aspect can be noted that is important for understanding the era, the personality of J.V. Stalin, and relations with him. My dispute with Stalin carried, if not to delve into its essence, the character of a challenge, and to qualify this as sabotage or subversion, this would be child's play. And the same aspect, but in the representation of J.V. Stalin, is pointed out by A.S. Yakovlev. An intelligent person, he works well, they envy him, they undermine him, and if in addition he is a brave person, says what he thinks, he causes discontent and attracts the attention of suspicious KGB officers who themselves do not know the case, but willingly use all sorts of rumors and gossip. Therefore, the question arises, could J.V. Stalin, alone, check all reports, including deliberate denunciations and slander, cases under investigation, and divide those of them which were based on the denunciations or the sabotorial zeal of the Chekists themselves, and those of them in which sabotage and other anti-state activities are really revealed? The answer is obvious. He could not, and no one, not Stalin, not Christ, nor anyone else, can substitute with his persona, no matter how gifted, the entire apparatus and all economic power, neither in Russia nor in any other country, and even more so, in the world. F.I. Chuyev gives an opinion about the repression of Air Marshal A.Y. Golovanov, who himself barely escaped arrest during the period of Yezhovism. So I remember meetings, conversations with Stalin, how many times on certain issues. All this fell on deaf ears. When did I begin to remember? When they began to pour all kinds of dirt on Stalin. I'm surprised not by how many people died under him, but by how he managed to put a stop to it. After all, the general mood was such that they could have destroyed half the country themselves with their own hands. And you think to yourself, devil take it, how things take shape in our Russia. You think about past times, about Peter the Great, and you see, everything repeats itself. History, perhaps in new ways, nonetheless, repeats itself. More than once I recalled how many times Stalin said that being determines consciousness and consciousness lags behind being. And the thought comes to me, after all, in the essence of things, we must think in a communist way. But it is thought, in the way of the 18th century, how to shove someone else aside. A.E. Golovanov, 1904-1975, the organizer of the creation of long-range bomber aviation in the USSR, received the rank of Marshal in 1943 at the age of 39, from 1944 Chief Marshal of the Aviation. In September 1953, he was exiled to the reserve. And at that time, as it is now, there was a deficit of professionally literate cadres and simply decent people. However, N.S. Khrushchev did not say anything about this in his report to the 20th Congress. And therefore, if one does not delve into the essence of the matter, then it seems that N.S. Khrushchev is right. JV Stalin is a maniacally suspicious tyrant, and all the others are innocent victims. But the fact that NS Khrushchev himself and the subsequent leaders of the CPSU and the USSR did not want to delve into the essence of the issues, did not want to systematically, and in the essence of the issues, personally work with letters received in their address from ordinary citizens and from professionals who were sincerely behind the cause, but instead trusted in all the official reports and opinions of the hierarchy of bureaucrats. These are facts, and that they really did not often tolerate objections, this is also a fact. Another fragment from the memoirs of A.S. Yakovlev. In the period described, A.S. Yakovlev was the Deputy People's Commissar of the aviation industry. In the summer of 1940, the People's Commissar and I were summoned to the Kremlin. When we entered Stalin's office, a conference was underway. Almost all the members of the Politburo were seated at a long table. Stalin approached from the opposite side, greeted, then took some document from the table, and, standing, without making an invitation to sit as is customary, began to read it aloud, without any explanation. As he read, my health worsened. It was a letter from one of the designers, in which he asked for permission to carry out the project of an aircraft with very high combat qualities that he had developed. The designer wrote that he could not count on the support of the People's Commissariat, where the one who was in charge of experimental aircraft construction was Yakovlev, who, being a designer and fearing competition, would not let this project live. That is why he appeals directly to the Central Committee. In conclusion, the author of the letter expressed surprise that in such a matter as experimental aircraft construction, there is a designer who cannot be objective in any way and constricts others. And he ended the letter with a promise to fulfill the task, should it be entrusted to him, and to show that he could give the country the best, fastest, and most powerful fighter in armament. There was complete silence. Everyone present had listened attentively. It already seemed to me that it was not by chance that the leaders of the party had gathered here. Stalin finished reading, slowly, carefully folded the pages. Well, what do you say? I was extremely upset, but I said, this designer did not contact me. Well, and if he had? In this case, we would have considered the project, and if it had turned out to be good, we would have submitted a proposal to the government to build the aircraft. And how is the project? Good? I'm at a loss to say anything, because I've not seen the project. It's not clear why the author applied directly to the Central Committee. I, as promised, tried to be objective. The People's Commissar was also hearing about the project for the first time and could not say anything. Then Stalin said, of course, he should have talked to you first. Without having spoken to you, immediately writing a complaint against you is not right. I don't know what kind of project it is. Maybe the plane will be good, or maybe bad. But the numbers are tempting. Let's risk it. Let it be built. By the way, what will such an airplane cost? I think 9-10 million. We'll have to take a chance. Promises are very tempting. Perhaps the money will be wasted. Well, I will take the sin upon myself. And I ask you, do not go after him for this letter. Help to build the plane. I gave my word that I would take all measures in order to ensure the construction of the aircraft. The People's Commissar made the same promise. When the issue was resolved, Stalin told me, it's probably unpleasant for you that such letters are written, but I'm happy. Incidentally, this is not the first letter. It would be bad if no one complained. This would mean you want to live in harmony with everyone at the expense of the state. Do not be afraid to quarrel when it's necessary for the task. This is better than friendship at the expense of the state. The personal interests of people do not always coincide with those of the state. In addition, you are a designer. You have great success, you are envied and you will be envied as long as you do well. They do not envy only those who have no success. I was already at the door when I heard from behind me. And don't oppress the designer for the complaint. Let him build it. We will risk millions. I will take the sin on my soul. Needless to say, the constructor received the necessary support. Unfortunately, despite the high costs, the plane did not work out and crashed on the first flight. At the same time, trying to save the machine, one of the best military test pilots, Nikashin, died. And if they did not tolerate objections, then the resolution of the conflict of opinions was passed on to the court of the apparatus of bureaucracy that was, as it were, subordinate to them. The apparatus of bureaucracy then transformed the conflict of opinions into a conflict of personalities about the rejection by subordinates or ordinary citizens of the allegedly wise orders of their higher authorities. Taking the side of the authorities, whose opinion was formed by the bureaucracy, within this conflict created by the bureaucracy themselves. As can be seen from the excerpts from the memoirs of contemporaries we have quoted, J.V. Stalin did not tolerate this, and all the leaders were afraid to be caught by him in the act of clamping down on critics and sabotaging proposals coming from subordinates and ordinary citizens. During the reign of the successors of Joseph Stalin, few of the professionals were arrested for sabotage or politics, but professionals who expressed their disagreement with their superiors, nevertheless, under the rule of N.S. Khrushchev and his successors, could neither be in the party and the state apparatus nor in the professions. This is what distinguishes the era which began with the 20th Congress from the era of J.V. Stalin. Under J.V. Stalin, professionalism was valued and accumulated in the administrative apparatus and in all professional spheres. The difference in the rates of scientific technological progress, economic and general cultural development of the USSR, in comparison with the modern leading capitalist powers in the era of J.V. Stalin and in subsequent times, is an integral confirmation of the falsity of the 20th Congress and all the policies that follow from it. Slave labor is not effective, and the regime of J.V. Stalin could not be an exception to this general historical rule, just as the post-Stalinist regimes in the USSR and in Russia were not exceptions to this rule. In other words, if in the Stalin era the rates of economic and general cultural development of the USSR were the highest, this means that unlike in subsequent times, it was not an era of tyranny based on fear and slave labor, although many in the USSR were filled with fears, including those that were caused by real abuses of power, by petty self-interest, and real, purpose-oriented sabotage by anti-Bolshevik political forces. That is to say, that the nature of the abuse of power and mistakes in politics in the Stalinist era lies to a greater extent not in the personality of J.V. Stalin, but in the personalities of if not millions, then hundreds of thousands of such types with servile parasitic nervousness and ambitions of domination, like N.S. Khrushchev and his puppeteers. The key to understanding the era, which began with the revolution of 1917 in Russia, was given by the Russian historian V.O. Kluchevsky at the end of the 19th century. He described the prospects for the implementation of projects for the transformation of social relations in the spirit of socialism, which ultra-left intellectuals themselves have raved about and harassed others about since the second half of the 19th century, with one phrase: a society of a previous community made up of scoundrels. According to this key, which N.S. Khrushchev and other critics of J.V. Stalin did not want to use, the accusations against J.V. Stalin are in their essence accusations. Being at the head of the party and the state, he did not keep back all the personal licentiousness, impersonal evil nervousness of the entire population of the USSR, and in particular of the employees of the party and state apparatus. No one out of all people, however, is able to do this. State decrees on blagonraviousness and virtue are observed only to the extent that society itself is blagonavious and virtuous, and to what extent villains of various kinds are frightened by the state, as a result of which they are forced to be hypocritical and to pose as blagonavious and virtuous people. And so it was and is. And it should be said that the opponents of J.V. Stalin themselves made demands on him as if he were God, but had not fulfilled his duties. Moreover, they are sure that they were not slaves to the cult of personality. However, it will not be so. People must decide what they want. To be a society of a previous community, for which it is necessary, first of all, to work on oneself in order to become a decent, sovietious human, or to be a society of villains, which, in the long term, is doomed to inevitable suicide.